of law enforcement agencies are struggling with low morale, recruitment challenges, and a tarnished reputation. If you're ready to transform your agency, to strengthen your team, and build trust in your community, we're here to help. The Elevate Your Call to Service podcast shares a revolutionary approach to leadership development. Join us and discover how to elevate your leadership journey and your agency to new heights of excellence.
We're your hosts, Michael and Cathy McIntosh. Mike is a retired sheriff and current bureau chief in the Denver metro area with nearly 40 years of law enforcement experience.
Cathy is a business and branding expert with a unique perspective on the human side of law enforcement.
Together, we share a powerful blend of practical experience and insightful roadmaps to elevate your call to service. Welcome back. Today's episode is all about recognizing the hidden costs of poor communication, understanding what makes communication effective, and learning strategies to improve how you speak, how you listen, and how you connect with your team. I think it's clear and obvious that a lot of leaders have explained something to their team only to realize later that it was completely misunderstood, right? You and I had this just setting up the podcast room today. I told you something about a bookshelf. Well, there's 2 bookshelves in the room.
I think it happens all the time in marriage, in relationships. I think it happens all the time in our communication with our teams. Clear communication is so important. And I would tell you that from surveys that you do, from just questions that you ask, one of the most common complaints is that there's poor communication in an organization, in a marriage, in something that you have to constantly be working on is clear communication.
It's a problem that a lot of leaders face, and it feels like almost an overwhelming problem that's hard to fix because we think communication should be just routine and it should come naturally, but it doesn't. It's extremely important to be intentional and proactive about your communication just as much as you are about your leadership. And communication directly correlates to your effectiveness as a leader, whether you're in law enforcement or not.
Oh, absolutely. And, as you're talking about that, I just think of different examples where, you're just not on the same page when it comes to communication. And just how that is one of the things that can be very ineffective. And it also really starts to break down teams. It can break down divisions. It can break down agencies if there's poor communication.
I think one of the essential problems with communication is we feel like it's delivering a message and that's all there is to it. Well, I told you XYZ, so I delivered that message. But what we don't do is ensure that there's understanding and that there's clarity around what we've communicated. That's what starts to break down trust. That's what starts to break down inspiration and morale when people just feel like, I just get screamed at all the time because I'm supposed to know, but I don't know.
Right. And I think that one of the things that we forget as leaders or supervisors is that it really is a two-way street. Just because you said it doesn't mean that it was received the way that you intended it to be received. And so, as we'll talk about today, it's really important that you have some of those clarifying questions, either as the receiver, but also as the communicator. And so many times we push the responsibility off on the receiver, when in actuality, it's my responsibility as the one that's the messenger, the one that's delivering the information. It's my responsibility to ensure that the receiver's getting it and understands what it is that was just said.
When you can walk into maybe a shift briefing where you clearly outline the priorities for the day and your officers leave feeling confused, feeling frustrated, that doesn't get anyone anywhere. But when they have clarity, that's what success looks like. When everybody leaves the room knowing exactly what to expect next, knowing exactly what the day's going to look like, that can, again, go back to building teams and building your reputation as a communicator even. So there's just a lot that is cemented in how well you communicate or not. It is a foundational element to leadership that is so often overlooked, going back again because people think that it should come naturally. And I just communicate the way I communicate. That's just the way I am. That needs to stop immediately.
Yeah.
And we all need to improve on the way that we communicate with one another. There's a lot of things that we can do to communicate better. And one of them is effective listening. And just like you said, repeating things back. It feels so redundant and so ridiculous of an exercise to do, but it's such a valuable exercise, and it helps just that ripple effect that we talk of negativity. It helps the ripple effect of positivity when things are communicated well. I'm going to just point out our daughter-in-law because she's such an incredible listener. I feel like that is one of her great strengths.
Yeah.
And there are times when we'll be working side by side in the kitchen or whatever, and we're just chatting, and I'm just focused on doing my task, and my hands are busy, and I'm looking the opposite way. But when I speak to her, she will literally stop what she's doing. She will look me in the eye, and she will listen. And part of it is a little bit overwhelming because I'm like, at this point is not that important. You don't need to, you don't need to do this quite so much. But it also makes me feel like what I'm saying is important, that she values it. And I know that she's doing everything that she can to hear me clearly and to receive and understand the message that I'm delivering, whether it's simple or complex. That's such a good model for all of us to follow.
Right.
We are in such a world of multitasking where we are listening to 4 different things and doing 2 additional things and trying to hear and communicate with others at the same time. It doesn't work. We've been fooled into thinking that we can multitask to this degree. We can't. It's a myth. It can't be done. There are a lot of consequences for poor communication. There's a lot that's at stake when we miss the mark on communication. For supervisors, how do you think that looks?
Well, as I go back and I think about the supervisor standing in front of a shift briefing, and the information that they're putting out, especially to a new team that may be trying to understand and receive the information in the way that the supervisor's trying to put the information out. A lot of times there's a disconnect there, and one of the other things that I just want to point out, and that story that you just told about our daughter-in-law just really solidifies that. As a supervisor, when you're communicating, you really need to what I call read the room, right? Mm-hmm. Are people paying attention, or are they on their phone? Are they looking at their CAD screen? Are they doing other things? With the assumption that I can do both, Sarge. I can hear what you're saying and I can do this, and both are important, right? And that's not the case. When you're running a briefing, you need to make sure that all eyes are on you, and that they're intent and they're listening, and that they're listening well. Mm-hmm. Because the other thing that does for me as the one that's delivering the message, I can start to visually see whether you understand what I'm saying or whether I'm not being clear in my messaging. Mm-hmm. And that's so important for the person that's giving the message, right? You have to have people that listen well. And that's one of the first expectations that you have to kind of set the stage for is, turn your phones off, put your computer screens down. I want your eyes on me. Not because it's about me, but because the message that I need to give, I need to know that you understand it. Mm-hmm. And I can tell by looking at people that they don't, which means that, okay, I can see that maybe you're having some misunderstanding about this. Tell me where you're at so that I can communicate it more clearly.
And it can be just the little subtle cues, the look of confusion that crosses someone's face, or maybe their shoulders slip and their body language just shifts a little bit. But if they're looking at you and giving you their full attention, you are able to perceive that and to respond to it. Where if they're multitasking, it could be caused by a lot of different things. That's why it's so key to do that active listening, and so key as a supervisor to take command of the room and demand that kind of attention, because situations can turn life and death. And if you don't have what you need, this is going to affect all of us.
Right.
It puts everyone in jeopardy when someone's off course.
Yeah. And this is the one place where we can start to set that kind of that baseline as to how it is that information is delivered and how information is received. Because as I start to read that, I may know that this particular deputy, that they receive the information that I give well, but another deputy may struggle with that because of their experience level, or just kind of a different culture that,
or generation vernacular
that they grew up in, right?
Right.
So they're not. I'm an old man, and you're
talking to young kids,
right? I'm talking. So it makes a huge difference, and then you start to talk about how much communicating that we do that is not in person. That's become a huge norm today, and how many miscues there are through that, whether it's through the radio, whether it's through an email, through a text message. You and I are guilty all the time of, ensuring we do different little things in emails or in text messages to make sure that we understand each other's tone when the message is coming across. But that's because we've developed a relationship over the last 40 some odd years that we're able to, just with a few different emojis or whatever it might be, an exclamation point, we understand that about each other, that the information that we just delivered is great news. It's not bad neuse, because
it's not meant to condemn, or it's not meant to criticize.
Right.
There's a lot of communication tools that we can use that help us clearly communicate, even if we're not verbally face to face, and being able to see each other's reactions.
Right. Yeah. And when you now, in our role in law enforcement, there's a lot of information that is communicated every day, and sometimes it's not communicated, or it's not received the way that the messenger wanted it to be communicated. Right.
Yeah. And there's some strong keys to how to communicate well. And I would say one of those is to always strive for clarity. More words is not always better. You do not have to, I like to call it word vomit on someone else to try to get the point across. You don't have to talk for 20 minutes if it only takes 2 minutes. Right. If you choose your words carefully and you're clear with those words, you can get in, you can get out, you can deliver the message, and you can be well understood, right? The next thing I'd like to say is that it's important to tailor your message to your audience. And you kind of talked about reading the room. It's also important to know the understanding level that different people have. So sometimes you come home from work and you start telling me about your day, and you are just using acronym after acronym after acronym. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. You pause, you explain, all is well. As a recipient, I have to be able to ask without feeling stupid. And as the communicator, you have to be able to pause and fill me in without making me feel stupid.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to necessarily know all the acronyms that you have. So you have to know the audience that you're speaking to, and be able to communicate effectively in those ways. Those are two really strong keys to getting your point across and making sure that you're understood.
And let me just add a little piece to that, because When I think about that sergeant in front of a room that delivers a message, and if that sergeant has not allowed for those clarifying questions to come back, or is demeaning when a question comes back and makes the, well, no, you idiot, we're not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this. Well, it's probably not going to encourage others in that briefing to say, hey, Sarge, I don't quite understand what it is that you're asking about. So we have to be very, very careful when we first set that up. Just like if we're talking and I'm using acronyms and you say, hey, wait a minute, and I say, you know what, if I'm just not going to tell
I told you
the
this
story
yesterday.
Yeah, you should know the
probably
acronym
did.
by now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important that you become a communicator, somebody who's delivering a message that really solicits and encourages that feedback or that check in. This is important. I want to make sure that you understand, and they feel comfortable doing that. And you will know that. You will know whether you've arrived at that when people in briefing are asking you clarifying questions and they feel okay doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we should be.
Mm-hmm.
It should never feel like, oh, I don't want to ask this guy this question because he's going to bite my head off, or I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah.
And it's important. We also have new people that are coming to our teams. We'll get a new hire. They'll come to our team. They'll
just
not
a shift transfer.
Yeah, they'll not know the dynamic of the way that we communicate on that shift. Take the time to make sure that they feel like they can ask clarifying questions in that communication.
And we have to remember too, if one person's asking, more than one person was thinking exactly the same thing. So as a person who has a question, it's always important to go ahead and ask that question, because someone else in the room is also wishing they had the courage to speak up. So go for it, ask those questions, and then as a communicator, be willing to answer those gently and professionally, right? There's a story that was in the headlines quite a few years ago, and it's been made into a movie, and it's called sometimes a masterclass on communication in a life or death situation. And this is the story of the Miracle on the Hudson and Captain Sullenberger, who had such clear communication that he was able to save 155 lives by landing his plane into a river. We know this man as Sully because of the Tom Hanks movie, right? But he was so clear and decisive in the way that he communicated. He made sure that everyone on board survived the emergency when he had to land on that Hudson River. When he realized that those engines had failed, he started to share the gravity of the situation, to not present a scenario of doom and gloom, but to prepare his crew and his passengers and let them know exactly what to expect. And in doing that, he started to eliminate any confusion, any ambiguity, so that people could respond to each other effectively. They could respond to the critical needs of the emergency effectively, and that they could respond to the crew effectively as well. He was lauded as being unbelievably calm under pressure. There was just an incredible amount of stress in this situation, but Sully maintained that calm, measured tone. And you've got I believe he was a sergeant that we can talk about in a few minutes, that had that same calm tone and what it meant to you in the moment of a really horrible critical incident. But Sully's demeanor kept that crew focused, and it also prevented panic from taking over. And how critical is that? His co-pilot later said that Sully's calm communication created a sense of control, even in what felt like a completely impossible situation. I also like the fact that Sully's communication wasn't just one way. He coordinated seamlessly between all of the parties, his co-pilot, his crew, the passengers, but also he was receiving instruction from air traffic control, right? He was listening as much as he was talking and being able to navigate all of those things. His ability to respond effectively allowed him to make the best decisions in a situation that was devolving quickly and really needed all of him, needed his best. Again, it is said, and I love this, that this is a masterclass in communication, and it's just a picture and an illustration of how important clear communication can be. When you're speaking to someone one-on-one, typically we're not talking about life and death situations, but when you practice in that one-on-one realm and you get good at clear communication, it only prepares you for when the worst happens. It only makes you better prepared for when something's coming down the pipe that you can't see today. So it is critical that we just practice it. Practice makes perfect, and
Absolutely.
Perfect isn't going to happen. It just isn't.
Right.
I mean, you just said we've been married together over 40 years, and we still don't know which bookshelf we're talking about, right?
Right.
But perfect's not going to happen. Improvement always happens every day, day by day.
Yeah.
For sure. What would you say to someone who says that communication issues aren't the root of the problem with law enforcement? It's more like resources and systems and things of that nature. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I would totally disagree with that. Are there sometimes systems and resource problems? Yes. And sometimes systems and resources have been a crutch for us, and have actually hindered our ability to communicate, because we had to have other ways of doing that. And it's important, and we talk about this a lot in law enforcement. If our communications systems go down and we're on the scene of a critical incident, we still need to perform. So we practice being able to communicate sometimes without those systems, because we still have to, if our comms go down, it doesn't mean that we get to, well, our comms are down, we're going to pack up and we're going to go away. So I don't put a lot of stock into that, because I think the root of the problem goes back to the messenger and the receiver, and are they on the same page? And that's where we really have to focus. Is the messenger delivering it in such a way that the receiver is getting the information in a way that they understand what the messenger is trying to relay to them?
And I would end into that. There's things in life that you can control, and there's things that are beyond your control.
Right.
And when you can communicate well, that is something that you absolutely have control over. So work on the things that you can, so that you can better navigate the things that you can't, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Would you say that communication could fix a toxic culture or broken dynamics within a team or within an agency?
I think that without it, you're not going to fix it. You have to be able to communicate that well, right? If you're gonna lean into a toxic culture, there's a lot of steps in that, and we can talk about that in future episodes. But if you can't communicate, you're not going to be able to fix that type of culture.
Absolutely. I want to go back to the story that I hinted on in our last episode. You told the story of a SWAT call out that was very much a life or death situation, and then after we stopped recording, you started telling us about a sergeant who had just a very calming effect, just even in his communication over the radio, right?
Right.
Can you just fill us in on how that felt and how well it was received in those moments?
Yeah. So, before any SWAT situation is the original incident, right? And this just happened to be one of those that I was involved in both. So I was involved in the initial call, and then that call went to a SWAT operation and kind of turn my hat around and, as it were, and put on my SWAT gear, and then it became a SWAT incident. But I remember responding to that scene initially. I was the second car that was on scene of that shooting. A lot is going on. When there were shots fired towards me, and I got on the radio and said that there were shots fired, that causes a lot of other law enforcement, not just within our agency, but surrounding agencies to come running, right? So, the sergeant was on the other side of the county. He gets over to the scene that we're on, and a very tenured sergeant, a very well-respected sergeant, and he just had the ability to communicate in such a way that everybody was, high adrenaline, high anxiety, as it should. It's a critical incident. Rounds are being fired, but he was able to immediately show up on scene, and through his communication style and ability, he was able to calm everybody that was on scene, and he was able to paint a picture that I thought was really incredible. I love the way that he did it, because he obviously had a lot of deputies on scene, and he wanted to know exactly where they were at, what it is that they could see, and then he would mentally kind of figure out, I don't like where you're at, and I want you to move, and he would give a direction. The thing that did for that deputy was, okay, the sergeant understands where I'm at. He feels either uncomfortable or now comfortable with where I just moved to. But it also gave those of us that were on scene that same picture, right? Because I didn't know where everybody was at, and his ability to calmly just walk us through that process really brought down the anxiety level that we were all feeling at that time, and we were able to work that problem until the SWAT team could get on scene, and then it continued throughout the night. But I think sometimes we take for granted those folks, those supervisors that have the ability to really understand what's going on and bring that level down. And in law enforcement, there's a lot that we can tell by somebody's voice on the radio.
For sure.
And if somebody is screaming into the radio, that ramps everybody up, just like the story you told about Captain Sully. If you have somebody, or the sergeant that I was discussing, if you have somebody that's on the radio that has a calm demeanor, it's like, okay, we've got a situation, we've got a problem, and we're going to work through the problem.
We're going to get right through
That's what we do. We work through problems, right?
Excellent.
So it's, even in that communication over the radio, there's ways that we can get the message across, and we can change even kind of the mindset of those that are on the scene and trying to work through the problem.
Excellent. Poor communication is one of the most common leadership challenges, and it's often something that people refuse to work on because they think it should come naturally. So this episode is really meant to encourage people to work on it. Do what you got to do. And work on it.
And really understand, again, that it's a two-way street, right? You are part of that community. If communication is a problem, and you're frustrated because you think that it's the other person, well, you're half of that problem, right? So you have to be part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just up to the receiver, it's also up to the messenger to make sure that there's clarity in the message so that the receiver understands what the point that you're trying to get across.
Absolutely.
It's critical. So, having said all of that, as we think about wrapping this up, can you just recap the important takeaways that we have from this incredible topic?
Absolutely. Again, we can never be perfect communicators. We can only be better communicators than we were yesterday. And if we look at some practical tools on how to get better and ways to actually practice, there's a few things that I like to encourage people to do. One is to think about your message before you deliver it. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily have to write it out. You don't have to script it. But think through the points that you want to make. And I had mentioned word vomit earlier, and how disruptive that can be. If you just think, I want to communicate these 3 points, then you can focus on those 3 points. And you can make sure that those are not just delivered, but they're understood. When you use too many rambling words, you start to dilute your message, and it becomes not strong, but very weak. And then the listener has to just process so much in order to pull out the nuggets and what was important. So think about what you want to say before you say it, and then say it concisely and clearly. I love what you said about reading the room, and not just knowing who your audience is, but being able to, as often as possible, to read people's expressions and their body language as you're trying to deliver a message, and respond. When someone looks confused, speak into that gently, and know that it's probably something that you said incorrectly or not thoroughly enough, and take ownership of it. Don't point the finger at the recipient for not understanding. Know that there was probably some sort of a breakdown in what you thought you said and what actually came out of your mouth. So be able to just tailor your approach and read your room. And then do the silly thing of repeating a message back so that you know you're on the same page. It absolutely feels awkward, but it is so worth that feeling of discomfort for 25 seconds. And once that's over, you're all going to be in a much better place. So practice that and repeat back what you thought you heard, or ask someone else to repeat back what you think you said, so that you make sure everybody's on the same page.
Great key tips. Sure appreciate this opportunity and the conversation and the communication.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Ready to build a stronger team, improve your reputation, strengthen officer safety, and recruit top talent? Visit us at leleaders.com and schedule a call with us today. We'd love to discuss how our coaching programs, workshops, and keynote addresses can help you build proactive leaders in a reactive profession.
In the meantime, if you like what you've heard today, we'd love your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.